Angel's Voice ASMR. Shantaram, Part 7. We're on page 73 if you'd like to follow along with the book. I had to change. I had to get involved. The city wouldn't let me be a watcher, aloof and apart. If I wanted to stay, I had to expect that she would drag me into the river of her rapture and her rage. Sooner or later, I knew I would have to step off of the pavement and into the bloody crowd and put my body on the line. And with the seed of that resolve born in that convulsion and portent, for Bacchus' dark circuit of the city began. When we resumed our tour, he took me to a slave market not far from Dungary, an inner suburb famous for its mosques, bazaars, and restaurants. The main road became streets and the streets became lanes, and when those proved too narrow for the taxi to negotiate, we left the vehicle and walked together in the sinuous busyness of the crowds. The further we traveled into the Cataline lanes, the more we lost of the day, the year, the very age in which we lived. As automobiles and then scooters disappeared, the air became clearer, sharper with the sense of spices and perfumes undulled by the diesel and petrol fumes prevalent elsewhere. Traffic noise faded, ceased, and was replaced by street sound, a class of children reciting verses from the Korean in a little courtyard, the whir and scrape of stone on stone as women ground spices in doorways, and the whining optimism of cries from knife sharpeners, mattress fluffers, stove repairers, and other hawkers. They were people sounds everywhere, played with voice and hand. At one turn in the puzzle alleyways, we passed a long metal rack where bicycles were parked. From then on, even those simple machines vanished. Goods were transported by bearers with enormous bundles on their heads. One burden usually carried by all, the thudding pressure of the Bombay sun, was lifted from us. The lanes were dark, cool, shadowless, although only 3 and at most 4 stories tall. The buildings leaned in upon the winding pathways, and the sky was reduced to a thin brushstroke of pale blue. The buildings themselves were ancient and dilapidated. Stone facades, which had once been splendid and impressive, were crumbling, grimed, and patched with haphazard necessity. Here and there, small balconies jutted out to meet one another overhead, so close neighbors could reach across and pass things out with an outstretched hand. Glimpses inside the houses shows unpainted walls and sagging staircases. Many ground floor windows were held open to reveal makeshift shops for the sale of sweets, cigarettes, groceries, vegetables, and utensils. It was clear that the plumbing was rudimentary. Where it was all connected, who knows? We passed several places where women gathered with metal or clay pots to collect water from a single outside tap, and skeined over all the buildings like metal cobwebs were complicated traceries of electrical conduits and wires, as if even that symbol and source of the modern age and its power was no more than a fragile, temporary net that might be swept away by a rough gesture. Just as the contracted lane seemed, with every twist and turn, to belong to another age, so too did the appearance of the people change as we moved deeper into the maze. I saw less and less of the Western-style cotton shirts and trousers so common everywhere else in the city, until finally those fashions disappeared from all but the youngest children. Instead, the men wore traditional garments of colorful diversity. There were long silk shirts that descended to the knee, that were fastened with pearl buttons from neck to waist, kaftan robes in plain colors or stripes, hooded cloaks that resembled the garb of monks, and an endless variety of skull caps, when white or beaded colors, and turbans in yellow, red, and electric blue. The women were more conspicuously bejeweled, despite the indignance of the quarter, and what those jewels lacked in money's worth was found in the extravagance of their design. No less prominent were cast marked tattoos on some foreheads, cheeks, hands, and wrists, and every bare feminine foot was graced by anklets of silver bells and coiled brass toe rings. It was as if all those hundreds of people were costumed for home, for themselves, not for the public promenades. It was as if they were safe there to clothe themselves in tradition and display. And the streets were clean. The buildings were cracked and smeared with constricted passageways, were crowded with goats, chickens, dogs, and people. And each thin face showed the shade and hollows of penury, but the streets and the people were stainlessly, scrupulously clean. We turned then into more ancient alleyways so narrow that two persons passed one another only with difficulty. People stepped into doorways waiting for us to walk past before they moved on. The passages had been covered with false ceilings and stretched awnings, and in the darkness it wasn't possible to see more than a few meters in front or behind. I kept my eye on Prabhaka, fearful that I wouldn't find my way out alone. The little guide turned often, drawing my attention to a loose stone in the path ahead or a step or some obstruction. Concentrating on those perils, I lost my orientation. My mental map of the city turned, blurred, faded, and I couldn't guess at the direction of the sea or the major landmarks. A Flora Fountain, VT Station, Crawford Market. We'd passed on our way to the quarter. I felt myself to be so deep in the flow and the reflux of those narrow lanes, so smothered by the intimacy of open doors and perfumed bodies, that it seemed I was walking inside the buildings, inside the very homes, rather than between them. We came upon a stall where a man in a sweat-stained cotton vest stirred battered foods frying in a dish of bubbling oil. The blue flames of the kerosene stove, eerie and claustral, provided the only light. Emotion haunted his face. It was anguish, some kind of anguish, and the dull stoic anger that hangs in the eyes of repetitive, ill-paid work. Prabhaka moved past him into the darkness beyond. As I approached the man, he turned to face me, and his eyes met mine, and for a moment the full force of his blue-lit anger was directed at me. Long years after that day, the Afghan guerrillas I came to know as friends on a mountain near the siege of Kandahar talked for hours about Indian films and their favorite Bollywood movie stars. Indian actors are the greatest in the world, one of them said once, because Indian people know how to shout with their eyes. The backstreet fried foods cook stared at me with shouting eyes and stopped me as surely as if he'd pushed a hand into my chest. I couldn't move. In my own eyes there were words. I'm sorry that you have to do this work. I'm sorry that your world, your life is so hot and dark and unremembered, and I'm sorry that I'm intruding. Still staring at me, I was gripped by the ridiculous, terrifying thought that he was going to throw the boiling oil in my face. Fear jerked at my feet, and I moved, easing my way past him with my hands flat against the damp surface of the stone wall. 2 steps beyond him, my foot struck a crack in the path, and I stumbled and fell, dragging another man down with me. He was an elderly man, thin and frail. I could feel the wicker basket of his bones through his coarse tunic. We fell heavily, landing near the open entrance to a house, and the old man struck his head. I scrambled to my feet, slipping and sliding on a pile of shifting stones. I tried to help the man to stand, but there was an elderly woman who squatted on her haunches there in the open doorway, and she slapped at my hands, warning me away. I apologized in English, struggling to find the words for I'm sorry in Hindi. What are they? Prabhaka taught me the words. Muhako Avosain, that's it. I said it 3-4 times in the dark, quiet corridor between the buildings. The word echoed like a drunkard's prayer in an empty church. The old man moaned, quietly slouching in the doorway, and the woman wiped his face with a corner of her headscarf and held the cloth out for me to see the bright stain of blood. She said nothing, but her wrinkled face was creased with a frown of contempt. With that simple gesture, holding out the blood-stained cloth, she seemed to be saying, "Look, you stupid oaf, you clumsy barbarian, look what you've done here." I felt choked by the heat, smothered by the darkness and the strangeness of the place, and the walls seemed to press upon my hands as if only my arms prevented them from closing in on me altogether. I backed away from the elderly couple, stumbling at first, and then plunging headlong into the shadowland of the tunnel street. A hand reached out to grab at my shoulder, and it was a gentle touch, but I almost shouted out loud. "This way, Bubba," Prabhaka said, laughing quietly. "Where are you taking yourself?" "This way only, along this passage now, and you must be keeping your 2 feet to the outside because too much dirty it is. In the middle of the passage is okay." I'm going to end there. It's only a 10-minute video, just to let you know that I'm back. I had to do a little bit of caregiving during the pandemic, and it took up all my time. But I hope to start recording more and being more active on this channel. I appreciate you listening, and I hope that maybe we can watch the movie together, because I just heard a rumor. It is made into a movie on Apple TV, I think, so we should check that out together. So that's all for now, and just know that you're loved, and I missed you, and I'm still here, and I hope that you're able to relax and have a really good night.